Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen Podcast. As always, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could take a moment to hit the like button, I'd appreciate it. That helps motivate the YouTube algorithm to share this with more people. Also, if you want to get alerted when there's new podcasts coming out, you could subscribe and hit the alert button, change the level of alert that you would like. If you're listening to this on the various podcast apps, on audio format, you can subscribe to those apps, or you can go to the website simplicityzen.com and sign up for the guest list or the mail list there. Also, I like hearing people's feedbacks about the interviews. So if you want to reach out, my contact information is there. So today my guest is Heather Shoren Iarusso. Did I pronounce that right? Iarusso?
Yes.
Okay, I meant to check that before we started. She's currently the director and head of practice for San Francisco Zen Center's online practice center. She moved to Tassajara in 2008, where she lived for a total of 7 years while completing 12 90-day practice periods. At Tassajara, she served such roles as Ino, which is the head of the meditation hall, Tenzo, which is the head cook, Shika, which is the guest manager, which is particularly important at Tassajara, and Shuso, which is a head student for a practice period where you work closely with the abbot who's in charge. Heather was ordained as a Zen Priest in October 2015 by Teah Strozer, who served as a guiding teacher of Brooklyn Zen Center for many years. Heather worked there at Brooklyn Zen Center for 2 years in roles such as Eno, program director and communications coordinator, and was also the interim executive director. Heather received Dharma transmission in September 2022. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Barry, for inviting me. Appreciate meeting
and also,
you.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned Heather actually, how I found out about her. Heather has an excellent blog and podcast. It's called Spark Zen on the Substack network. Could you give the URL for that real quick?
Sure. It's just sparkzen.substack.com. Mm-hmm. So we're going a little meta, META, and hopefully some METTA in this podcast as you're interviewing me, and I'm also a podcaster, so such is life.
Yeah. So the online program, so are you basically the Tonto for that? Would that be the equivalent?
Well, I think that's probably too strong of a word because the online practice center, there aren't any residents, obviously. Mm-hmm. It's mostly an online portal. We use Mighty Networks. Mm-hmm. We have an online Zendo, so we have a separate Zoom room for people who are sitting online in the mornings and in the afternoons, Monday through Friday, and then Saturday morning there's 2 sittings. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say that I'm the Tonto because there aren't really any residents. I am responsible for, I do see students in practice discussion, some people who live at City Center where I reside, and also people who live elsewhere. So the virtual Sangha, I also work with some students, and I have like a twice monthly study group with some of them. Mm-hmm. And then I offer like a tea and discussion on Tuesday morning, second Tuesday, and then a couple of evening practice sessions. Mm-hmm. So I think Tonto wouldn't really, in the hierarchy of a Zen temple, would probably be too strong of a word. So
makes sense. It sounds like that's nearing a full-time job's worth of tasks to do, though. Is that correct?
Well, that's just a thimble, if you will, of some of the other administrative duties that I'm responsible for. Because even though there's about, I would say on average, 20 to 25 people who show up in the online Zendo, which we affectionately call Oz, who come to Oz every morning, not all of them interact with me as their teacher. Some of them already have established relationships with teachers. So, and also some of them are so new that they're not really even sure what that is or how to, go from meditating to working with a teacher. whether that's me or someone else. So I think that's also part of the issue to figure out is how can we establish a path of practice for online Sangha or community members who would like to take up the practice of Zen in that more formal way.
Cool. What happens if some of those, so I imagine some of the people who are practicing with you don't have local sanghas that are an option for them.
Well, so there's some people who just began sitting with us online during the pandemic and had never meditated before. There's a few people who used to live in the Bay Area, and like now one of them lives in Toronto. She used to practice here, but now she's in Toronto, but she still prefers to sit with us. And then there's like another man in Florida who also used to live in the Bay Area and practice at one of our centers, who also sits with us in the morning. So I think it's just a mix of people, some very new, some who've been here before. And sometimes people live in the Bay Area, but they're not able to make it into our physical Zendo. So they sit online instead.
That makes sense. Would there be a path for any of those people to do Jukai? I mean, are you guys looking at an online Jukai path at all?
Yeah. I don't think right now, I think the way that would be pursued is if somebody would like to do Jukai and they've never been part of our physical center or met that teacher in person. I think hasn't probably really been fleshed out so much. I do know that there are people who are part of our online Sangha who already had a pre-established relationship with a teacher. And then maybe they moved away and they're doing Jukai. Like there's a few people coming, I think in January, who live elsewhere and they're doing Jukai with teachers here.
They're physically flying out there to do it in person.
Right. So I don't think we've really established that yet. Since everything went online during the pandemic, and now people are sitting back in our physical Zendo and it's finally open to the public as well. So I feel like this is now that we have an on-site practice as well as an online practice, it's something that we need to start paying attention to is, well, there's all these people who are never going to probably live here. How do they establish an authentic connection with a teacher, and what does that look like? So I think that's something that we are going to be discussing now that we're kind of on the other side, if you will, of the pandemic, even though obviously there's people who are still getting ill and dying from it as well. So
right. Yeah. So could we kind of maybe talk a little bit about your practice path, how you kind of got to this point, maybe where you grew up and a little bit about your family and so forth?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, which is, if you will, like a suburb of the Bronx. So it's lower Westchester County. And it grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly working class and immigrant. There were, like, my grandparents were from Italy. There were a lot of Italian immigrants in the neighborhood and people from Argentina, Jamaica, Portugal. So I've met a lot of people from around the world in my first 20 years or so of growing up in Mount Vernon, New York. And I was raised Roman Catholic. My father was, I would say, fairly devout Roman Catholic. So I went to a Catholic grammar school just up the block from where we lived, and did communion and confirmation, all the sacraments, and never really found, not that I would have used this word as a child, of course. It never really resonated with me. Catholicism, that there was a God who was judging me. That always made me feel bad. And I think I was speaking with Paul Haller, who was an abbot at Zen Center for a very long time. He was raised Catholic in Belfast, and we were both talking about how he really enjoyed being in the church when there wasn't anybody there. The silence, the incense smell, the stained glass windows, just the quietude of an empty church, which, that many of them were designed, especially I think, as far as I know, Catholic Church is very ornate, but also in a way to inspire us, right? To feel deeper and
like a sense of awe.
Yeah, a sense of awe, right? So I kind of like that part of it, and the singing and stuff, but I never felt any relief from heavy emotions, what we would call mental afflictions, the kleshas, the hindrances. I never felt relief. That practice of Catholicism never seemed to help alleviate the suffering.
What was your like demeanor like as a kid? Were you like outgoing, introverted? Were you party animal? What was
all of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I had two older brothers, so I think I probably at some point energetically realized that the power in my family was with the masculine energy. So my father was born in 1925 in the Depression in New York, the Great Depression, and my mother was born in 1938. So I would say he probably wasn't as patriarchal as some of his other friends because of his father dying when he was really little. So I think he developed a sensitivity around that. His mother was an immigrant and illiterate. So what we would say now, she was a single mother, which of course back then, nobody really talked about that in that way. So I think I was fairly extroverted. I always enjoyed meeting people. We had a lot of Italian and Italian American relatives, and we'd see them fairly frequently. And I think I was just always curious. I like to be outside, climbing trees, doing all the quote unquote tomboy things, wanting to be around my older brothers quite a bit. And then I had a younger sister as well, 4 years younger than me. I was pretty studious in grammar school. I really enjoyed school. I enjoyed learning a lot. Like I just was very curious. And then same in high school, although the first couple of years of high school, I didn't do so well academically. And then I sort of realized that if I wanted to go to college and escape my blue collar neighborhood and my blue collar life, not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but just for me, I just felt like if I never left my hometown, I would somehow be confined by people's expectations or ideas of me. Now, I didn't form that as a kid, but looking back, I realized that was one of the impetuses. Intuitively, I felt like I had to leave. So I started to study a lot more, stop partying the last couple of years of high school so that I could raise my grades and get into college. So
was your family pretty traditional in terms of your mom being a housewife and your dad working and stuff like that?
No, my mother, she was a licensed practical nurse, LPN. So I think when we were really little, my mother was home, but then at a certain age, after my sister, I guess, was a little bit older, my mom became a nurse. And so both of them worked. Both of them worked for most of my childhood, but my parents separated when I was 11 or 12. I was in the sixth grade. So then we were just sort of like latchkey kids. My older brother would have been like 15 or 16. So it was a pretty tight knit neighborhood, and we just would come home, make food for ourselves and watch TV, or I would do my homework.
So you were pretty independent.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like I was pretty independent. When I look at children now, when they're 12 or 13, I think, wow, I was really young.
Right.
But I think I always had a little bit of an independent streak and kind of also self-motivated. Like to study. No one really had to tell me to study. I really enjoyed studying. And I was kind of athletic. I enjoyed playing softball and volleyball and riding horses. So I kind of, just feel like for whatever reason, that was the karma that I was born with.
I don't have a huge sample size, but it seems like a lot of people that came from New York, they have a kind of a driving energy that maybe people from other areas don't have as well. Do you think there's anything to that, or?
I I think I mean, of course, as you know, that's a huge generalization. And I feel like it does seem to me now that I've been in Northern California for a while, and I've joked with people about this here. I think I've had a little, and then I moved out of the tri-state area. I went to Fordham University in the Bronx for my first year of college. And then I went to University of Connecticut so I could take horseback riding lessons because I really loved riding horses. So even though Connecticut's right next to New York, it's a whole nother world there. You know, like I was not, you know, I make this joke where one of my friends got a futon in her dorm. And I asked her where she got it from. And she said, "Oh, Ethan Allen." And I said, is that a friend of yours? She's like, "No, it's a furniture store." I mean, none of my friends were buying clothes from LL Bean or Eddie Bauer. I had never seen a catalog like that. Right. And I didn't grow up with Smiths and Johnsons. Right. So I wasn't really raised in this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant world. It was very ethnic world. So I feel like that's partly, and there's a lot of people, a lot of immigrants, obviously in the Northeast. I feel like that kind of really informed me was my communication style, not so, not like just kind of direct, you know, not so roundabout. Like I think sometimes Northern Californians or maybe other people can be, where I've learned to sort of softly go around topics to try to approach them. Nowadays, it's taking me a long time. The same in Central Texas, when I was working in Austin, I realized like, wow, I'm just so different the way people interact. You know, it's, I don't know, like, I don't know what it is about the way there seems to be a cultural difference in communication styles.
I remember I knew these people online through like a Grateful Dead online community for a while. And I remember when and they were from New Jersey. And I remember when I first hung out with them, I was like really taken aback by their brashness. And they're like, "No, this is just how we are. It's nothing personal." You know? Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you for tiptoeing around our delicate sensibilities out here.
Well, I have to say though, you know, I mean, part of the journey is really how can I attune myself to a way other people communicate so that what I'm saying can be heard, and just to be more skillful. It's something, obviously as a Zen priest, it's always helpful to be more skillful if you can. And even though we know words and phrases miss the mark, we still have to say something. And I've learned some hard lessons about being overly, I don't know, just being a little too direct sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. So you mentioned, you know, how Catholicism really wasn't scratching your Duca itch. You know, what was, like, if you're comfortable talking about it, kind of what were your, like, what was causing you Duca as a teenager? You know, where, kind of, you know, what was like kind of your, to speak in Rinzai terms, you know, what kind of was your great doubt form at that point in your life, would you say?
Well, just, you know, of course, I think being a teenager in and of itself is has intrinsic suffering,
right?
In a developmental way, because we're further individuating from our parents and our relatives, and trying to, in some ways, emulate our friends, depending on how we're raised. So I think for me, for some reason, there was always this, I mean, the karma that I think that I inherited from my family, my parents and their parents and their parents, a lot of just afflictive emotions, you know, a lot of anger and grief and anxiety. And I feel that even though I went to confession all the time and I was fairly, I mean, I think I was pretty obedient in grammar school. I mean, I did typical kid things, but I certainly was a good student and very respectful. I was taught to be respectful of adults. So I just feel like there was this, way in which I just was not able to get out of this thick soup of heavy emotions, these kleshas.
Mm-hmm.
And also I was sexually abused as a kid. So adding that into being a teenager, and then my parents got divorced. So it's, you know, any kind of, as they call them nowadays, what's that word? The acronym is ACE, adverse childhood experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they use ACE. ACE doesn't seem like it's such a great acronym. I got so many aces. So so there was a lot going on there with the with the sexual abuse and my parents getting divorced.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until I was in my early 30s that I actually started practicing Buddhism by way of learning about Mohandas Gandhi in college.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was a political science major and an English major at University of Connecticut. And I started learning about Mohandas Gandhi, and I remember reading about I did a long paper on him, and I remember reading about his quest to gain independence from Great Britain. And I just remember what I would say now was this bodhicitta was stirring, which I of course had no idea what it was. I just felt this tremendous resonance with his teaching and his life. And then I started feeling that again when I started meditating at a transcendental meditation center in Florida, and I met a number of Hindus there. And I, again, feeling this something there. I lived at a transcendental meditation center for a while in rural Florida.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you got pretty heavily into it then?
Well, my mother and father actually meditated when I was I guess I was from 11 to 13 or something like that. My mom and my father, they went to the spiritual center and they got their mantras. So my mother would meditate and my father would fall asleep. So somehow when I was working in Florida as a newspaper reporter in the middle of nowhere, Florida, the rural Florida, I remember transcendental meditation. So there happened to be a center there. And I went out and got my mantra. And then after a few months, I moved in because I was trying to save money to go to graduate school. And I started practicing yoga and meditating with this mantra. And then I left after like 6 months to go to graduate school. But so I met all these Hindus and spoke with them about Hinduism and of course, TM. And then also I had what I would think was my first cosmic consciousness experience, where I was the center was right around this beautiful lake. It was a very old building, and my one room, there's a sliding door that faced this beautiful lake, and I was doing yoga every morning for like 45 minutes or so, which I wish I had kept up. And after doing this yoga, I was sitting on the bed meditating, transcendental meditation. And it was sunrise, and I heard the birds outside chirping. And then there they were in my heart. My heart center felt really warm and vibrant, and I could feel the birds singing in my heart. It was this extraordinary, just warmth and buoyancy, and I guess some kind of samadhi is what we Buddhists would call it. And that, I don't know how long that lasted, maybe 15, 20 seconds before my mind was like, hey, what's going on? But I didn't really have a teacher there to discuss it with. It was a profound spiritual experience.
Had you had any psychedelic experiences before that would be a precedent for that at all? Or, I mean, did you have any framework or similar, anything?
I mean, when I was in high school, a few times I did what we would call like a purple microdots, or like a mescaline, but it was probably not real mescaline. It was store mescaline, which someone later on told me was probably some kind of LSD, but it wasn't. I didn't have any of those like egoless, everything's in the present moment, or some crazy spiritual experience where there was I'm floating above everything. I mostly got paranoid and anxious, stayed up all night, watched the wallpaper move. And that happened like 3 times. And then I just said, no, this.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any profound spiritual experience from taking psychedelics.
Yeah. So this experience at the center, this would have been kind of your initial eye-opening experience that there's kind of something more going on.
Yeah.
Potential.
And I was also reading, I was reading at the time, like Ram Krishna and his disciples, Christopher Isherwood's books, his recollection of his time with his Hindu teacher. And again, there was something stirring for me that felt very similar to when I was studying Mohandas Gandhi, and then when I was reading about Ram Krishna and his disciples, and then practicing yoga and the TM. So there was, so I feel like I came to Buddhism through Hinduism, which kind of makes sense in some ways.
I'm curious. I try to ask this with anyone who's done TM because I'm kind of a little fascinated. I was reading this scientific study once on the way different meditation styles, what they do to the brain. And most meditation styles kind of shut down the self-referential parts of the brain, the me-making parts. And interestingly, transcendental meditation like increases activity in that area of the brain, at least in this one study. I don't know if it's been replicated or not. And I'm curious, having done TM and done Zen, Zen's more of the quieting down the me maker part of the brain. Yeah, I'm curious, like experientially, what is the difference between TM and more kind of real, like normal Zazen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for me, I sought out the TM because I was having, I'm not exactly sure why, but there was a period when I was a newspaper reporter in rural Florida before I moved into the TM Center, and I sought out the TM because I was having this really bad bout of insomnia, which I normally didn't have any issues sleeping. But I just, there was all this crazy energy, just a lot of vacillating energy and a lot of anxiety. So I sought out TM because of that. So, yeah, so I would say if you're looking at TM and then say Shikantaza, the just sitting of Soto Zen, and then of course there's koan introspection, and then the traditional or more traditional classic shamatha and vipassana, calming and insight. So with the TM, which was my first experience meditating, I think, you had your eyes closed and you were focusing on this mantra. I don't really recall that either helping with cessation of suffering. I don't remember, no one ever instructed me around like what thoughts are or about phenomena. Nothing around, there was no paradigm about the aggregates. So it was just, well, you follow this mantra, and if your mind wanders, just come back to the mantra being this, ancient sound, right? The primary sound, if you will. And so I feel like, again, even though I didn't know that I was looking for my suffering to be alleviated, I didn't understand that could be alleviated, because Roman Catholics, it was, yeah, you're suffering, everyone's suffering, not a big deal. You got your cross, I got mine. We'll get to the pearly gates and it'll all go away. So I don't remember there really being any. Yeah, I don't remember TM being effective or affecting me, other than just actually stopping, right? Just sitting still for a little while. I found what was more effective or more profound was actually doing yoga practice.
Like hatha yoga.
Yeah, hatha yoga. Just getting up in the morning, in the beautiful early morning light, and practicing yoga. And then I would do a mantra after that, or sometimes I would do a mantra with my mala, right? Those rosary beads of Buddhism and Hinduism. So I can't really say I remember much about TM. I don't remember feeling more or less egotistical afterward. I just felt that cosmic consciousness experience, I probably linked it to TM, or linked it actually to the yoga, I think, more than to doing TM.
It's interesting to me that you feel like you're kind of moved more by the yoga than the TM, because the more I kind of learn about the kind of neurobiology practice, the more convinced I am there really needs to be a somatic or embodied aspect of it. And I mean, that would kind of track with that somewhat. I think if it's only in your head, it's not at best, it's just going to be on the cushion.
Yeah. And again, there wasn't anybody there really saying much to me. Like in that way, it was a little, I mean, I think cult's too strong of a word, because I could obviously come and go freely, but they were pretty big adherents to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And there wasn't really much else that they read or talked about. So again, I didn't really get any instruction. I was only there for like 6 months, and I don't think the TM really helped with the anxiety. But somehow maybe it did, because the anxiety felt like it went away for a little bit, before I left. So I do feel like you, without, I mean, in my experience is that, Zen is a body practice. It's about, as my teacher would say, practice being a body. It's not an intellectual exercise. And of course, I think reading the teachings of the Buddha, and obviously there's hundreds and hundreds of books nowadays about Buddhism, can inform our practice on the cushion, just like our practice on the cushion informs our practice off the cushion. So
did you go to graduate school?
Yeah, I went, as one of my friends said, I'm hyper educated. I went to, I have an MA in journalism from American University. So I was a newspaper reporter for a while. And then I went, after being a reporter for, I think, about 3 or 4 years, I went and got an MFA in creative writing, as well as an MA in literature. It was the same 3-year program. So, and at one point there was a inverse corollary, I think, to how many master's degrees I had and how little money I was earning. So.
And then was this the master's that you left to get, left the center, the TM Center? Was this the creative writing one?
Well, I already had I had a master's degree in journalism from American University before I moved to Florida. So I was a newspaper reporter in Maryland for about a year. And then I took a job at the Tampa Tribune in rural Florida. And that's where I started practicing TM. And then I left that job as a newspaper reporter, moved to Louisiana to pursue a 3-year MFA in creative writing.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. And then what was your, if I'm reading your bio, you pretty much went straight from that program to Tassajara. Is that correct?
So I spent a few years in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And that's where I started practicing Zen in 2001. A few months before my father died, I started practicing Zen at the Austin Zen Center. And then
go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Had you encountered, so you hadn't, it seems like when you were at the TM Center, you kind of knew vaguely of Eastern spirituality, but not too much specific about Buddhism. Had you, between starting at the Austin Zen Center and then, did you have any encounters of Buddhism through books or people?
Yeah. So like I went from Florida, the TM Center, being a reporter, to Louisiana. And my boyfriend at the time, he was also interested in meditation and yoga. I met him at the TM Center. And while we were in Louisiana when I was in Louisiana getting my MFA, he moved with me from the TM Center to Louisiana. I started reading Lama Sura Das's book, Awaken the Buddha Within, I think it was. So we started reading books on Buddhism. I went from like reading Hinduism and practicing yoga to reading about Buddhism and doing more Buddhist type meditation while doing yoga and listening to books on Buddhism. So that's how I first learned about Buddhism, was through Lama Surya Das's book. And then from there, from Louisiana, then we both moved to Austin, Texas. And I started practicing at the Austin Zen Center in 2001, a few months before my father died. So.
What captured you about Buddhism? Like, what kind of spoke to you?
Well, first, I really appreciated the people that I met at the Austin Zen Center. I found, whereas I really enjoyed practicing yoga, I found that the people at the Austin Zen Center just seemed a little more grounded than some of the yogi practitioners I met in Austin. And I just liked them. So I felt at home with the Sangha in Austin. And that's where I met my teacher, Teah. I think that was 2002 or 3. And then I met Reb Anderson, Tenshin Roshi there as well.
He came out to guest teach or whatever.
Right, he did, because he was also coming out to Houston Zen Center as well. So that's where I met Teah and Reb, and then Galen Godwin, who's now the teacher at Houston, has been for a number of years. So that's where I started to, and then when I met Teah, I felt this immediate heart connection with her. Again, a lot of bodhicitta, like really, really powerful. And that was 2002 or 3, I think. And it wasn't until 2008 that I actually left my job and moved to Tassajara.
What, other than kind of just a gut instinct with Teah, what captured your attention in regards to her? Like do you remember the first time you saw her? Was there something about her bearing, or was it more her personality, or?
Well, she was teaching on Vasubandhu's 30 verses, which of course I didn't really understand, and
great for beginners.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about right, exactly. Well, it was all energetic for me. There was some just a lot of bodhicitta, just a lot of arising curiosity and feelings of warmth, a lot of heart feelings. And she just seemed present and patient, and a tremendous amount of attention. She just was attentive. And I remember my first practice discussion with her, and yeah, she surprised me when she asked, well, who's the most important person in your life? And I hesitated before I said, me. And she said, yes. She said, because, if you can't identify your own needs and fulfill those needs for yourself, you'll always be walking around trying to get validation and your needs met from other people.
Interesting. I would have failed that question.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, her point was, if we don't take that backward step thoroughly and deal with our own karma, then that's always going to clutter everything.
No, I agree with her. I just would have gotten it wrong, I'm sure of it.
Yeah. So it was just a profound meeting with her. And like, I was washing the dishes at the retreat center and just sort of mindlessly clunking them down to my left. And then I felt this hand on my hand, and I looked over and it was her. And she said, be there for the pot. And I'm like, what is she talking about? I'm like, oh, now I know. So yeah, there was that presence. I wanted what she had. I wanted to emulate her.
Yeah. So many, I've done well over 50 of these interviews now, and I'm really struck about how many people got into practice by just watching someone else, how they lived their lives, not what they said or anything like that, just the way they held space in the world. I find that really interesting, how that's and I really like online Zen, but I wonder if that's an aspect that might be lost a little bit, where you're not seeing how someone can hold space in the in the real world.
Yeah, it's difficult to feel the presence or energy of the person. I do feel that there's still obviously value, especially for new people. And then if they want to take that leap, like there's a person who's been hosting our online Zendo for the last year and a half. You know, she's one of the volunteers, and she's now coming to live at City Center for 2 weeks to work in the kitchen. So it can't, I mean, she lives in LA, so it's not that far for her to come. But I do feel like there's something for her that she's really stoked about Zen. So even though they may not be able to, you know, see or feel that energy in person, there's still something that seems to be conveyed.
How quickly did you kind of ramp up your practice and start doing sesshin and stuff like that?
Well, shortly after I started practicing at Austin Zen Center, which just initially was just like 2 days a week, I did my first Rohatsu, I want to say in the fall, in December 2001 or 2002. I can't remember. And so it was meeting Teah that made me ramp up my practice. I think I met her in 2002 or 2003, but whatever year it was that December that I did my first Rohatsu. And I did Jukai in January 2003 with the teacher at Austin Zen Center. So after I met Teah, I was like coming to Austin Zen Center every morning and every afternoon, even though she was back here in San Francisco. But that really made me ramp up.
So Teah was just a visiting teacher. I didn't realize that. I thought she was right. Okay.
Right. She was visiting. And then after the Vashu Bandhu workshop, I started just sitting every day at Austin Zen Center in the morning and then after work. It was a real lifeline for me. And again, I appreciated the community. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I got this really crazy job. I loved it, but it was very demanding, and I wasn't able to sit all the time. So,
yeah. Did you keep in touch with Teah after she went back to the area?
Yeah, I had the good fortune of my new job allowed me to travel. I had to travel to different places. So I came to Sacramento a few times, in San Diego, but first, obviously San Diego, I wasn't able to drive here, but I did drive down from Sacramento. And then I also, for work, came to San Francisco a couple of times. And so she was gracious enough to meet with me when I was here. And then she came back to, I think, Austin a couple of times. And then Rev Anderson came. I did some session with him. And then I think I just kind of hit rock bottom, to use a 12-step phrase, around just whatever I was doing still was not alleviating a lot of these mental afflictions, psycho-emotional afflictions. So the thought arose, well, hey, what would it be like if Zen were the center of your life? So that's when I left my job in 2008 and moved to Tassajara.
So you didn't live at the city center or anything first. You went, yeah. Was that unusual? Because I remember, my understanding was you normally have to do a couple practice periods at one of the other residential places first. Springs for you, or how did that work out?
You could go to the summer at Tassajara without having done any practice.
That makes sense.
However, I did my first practice period, the Tangario practice period, at Tassajara. For whatever reason, Paul Haller let me in to do it, because usually you're supposed to do a practice period somewhere else.
What year was this?
That was the fall of 2008.
Okay.
And I think most likely it's because Teah said, yes, I think she's ready. And then also Teah came and visited for about 7 or 8 days in October while I was there. So I did my first practice period at Tassajara in the fall of 2008.
How was that?
I loved it. I mean, that's the first time I asked Teah if I could ordain, was during that practice period. I really resonated with Paul. I've done like 5 practice periods with him, because I happen to just be living there, obviously. And yeah, I just really loved it. I didn't plan on staying at Tassajara for that long. I thought it was just going to be like a 6-month sabbatical, if you will. And then I remember writing to one of my friends and writing and saying, I felt like the outside world, the 9 to 5 world, was a sabbatical from my monastics, from being a monastic.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, something must have been grabbing you. Were you already seeing changes in your life from that kind of like deeper level of practice, or what was keeping you going?
Well, first I definitely was feeling some breaking up of those thick mental afflictions.
Mm-hmm.
I also, again, loved the community. I loved being part of a community. Everybody was working together, even if you didn't always get along, but we had a common goal,
Mm-hmm.
of practice and taking care of the guests. And then in the practice periods, the 90-day cloistered practice periods, it was just lovely to not be staring at a computer, not to be talking on my cell phone. I mean, wasn't much of a TV watcher back then. But there was just a way that being in nature was just enlivening my senses. And I felt more integrated with the environment, with my life. Mm-hmm. And I just really enjoyed the physicality of it, the schedule, just the quiet. It was just so beautiful to feel the seasons, arising in your body, when you're watching the leaves fall and the creek go from, really rushing creek to no water in the summer. You just it's an embodied reminder that that the environment is us, that we're not separate. So that's what started to happen was, I think, the slow dissolution. Well, classically, the 3 marks of existence, practicing meditation to experience the 3 marks of existence: suffering, not self, and impermanence. Mm-hmm. And I think the value of that kind of immersive experience was just having insight into the 3 marks of existence.
I'm curious, during that era, practicing at Tassajara, was there any talk of Kensho or awakening or anything like that? Or was that kind of verboten, or like what? I'm curious, what was the vibe around that?
Well, let me just say that I didn't really read very much of Buddhism before I went to Tassajara. So I was, I think I read Charlotte Joko Beck's Everyday Zen or Nothing Special, because there was a woman at Austin Zen Center who was a student of hers for a long time in San Diego. And then I also read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So I got to Tassajara only having read those 2 books. And so I didn't really know what, like, somebody was talking about jhanas, and I'm like, I don't even know what a jhana is. I just don't want to suffer anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So it was just like being really diligent on the cushion, as Teah would say, drop fascination with thinking. I mean, relentlessly doing that because I had no choice. I couldn't. The afflictive emotions were so strong that I was just desperate to be free. So that desperation really motivated me to drop thinking mind, drop thoughts over and over again, whether they were happy or negative or whatever, just over and over again, coming back to the body, back to the breath. So no, I didn't even know I had no idea what Kensho was, jhana, nothing. I mean, I just wanted to not suffer. So and I really practically knew nothing other than I wanted not to suffer. And so there wasn't any talk of Kensho. As I was read later on, it seems to me, and I want everyone listening to know that this is just my point of view, right? My sliver of the sky. It seems that what kind of happens a little bit is that we sort of swung away, the pendulum sort of swung away from Kensho, because Kensho is definitely more spoken about, as you know, in Renzai, where that's the goal really of meditation, is for body mind to drop away, to taste, touch, feel ultimate reality. So of course we know the downside of that is it can be we get attached to trying to achieve something. So shikantaza is there's goallessness, right? Just sitting with no gaining mind, right? Sitting just to feel, embody Buddha nature, which runs through all sentient and non-sentient beings. So that objectless awareness of shikantaza can be very powerful, but also it can be it cannot be so effective, if you will, in alleviating suffering, because not everybody is able to pay attention just to their breath and just sit there. I mean, many people, obviously our minds wander. So with Kensho, for me, it was just like, I didn't want to suffer. So whatever I needed to do, that was my main goal. And there wasn't really any talk about Kensho. I think that, I feel like depending on the teacher who was there, because every practice period it changed, there was more or less emphasis, say, on, like Paul Haller would emphasize, especially in the later practice periods, concentration, right? Because, when body mind is concentrated, right, that's when we can feel impermanence, suffering. I mean, I always felt suffering, but impermanence, distress,
right,
and the not self characteristic, right? So when we can start to experience arising phenomena as not us, right? Not taking it personally, but not just intellectually understanding not to take it personally, but when arising phenomena, whether it's mental or physical, is not grasped onto by the mind, then we feel it flowing through us. So whether that's big or little Kensho, I don't know, but just, I think that maybe people have experiences of Kensho that they don't know are Kensho, because this particular tradition of Soto Zen doesn't necessarily focus on it. And obviously, if you've spoken to my Dharma friend Kokyo Henkel, and I think somebody says, maybe sometimes we're a little anti-Kensho around here. I don't know. So for me, I feel like I don't think Kensho's the point necessarily. It's like the alleviation of suffering. And if along the way, as we're walking through the mist, getting wet, right, the dew of the Dharma permeating us, every now and then it's helpful to have a little bit of a lightning strike, right? Like the gradual path, getting struck by lightning along the gradual path can be very helpful.
Yeah, I think, and I think one risk of like kind of the gradual path is I think there needs to be a wisdom component, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes the gradual path can be a little wisdomless, if that makes sense. I think that may be a challenge with that perspective. Like even if there's a reduction of kleshas and someone's kind of embodying awakening, I think maybe the kind of turn that last corner, there needs to be prajna, basically. It's interesting that you said Paul Haller focused on concentration, because he was just a monk at that point. He wasn't transmitted, but was probably 1992. He was at my first session at City Center. It was actually led by Reb Anderson. But I remember Paul Haller was there. Am I pronouncing that right? Haller? And I remember his samadhi was so palatable that it was almost hard to look at him. Like kind of like it was like looking at the sun in a way. Like it's just like there's just like I just feel like he was like sucking in matter, into his to his zazen posture. It really like it was a relaxed sitting, but it was like clearly intense and single pointed. I remember it was really striking to me and stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that it's concentrated mind, right? Joriki, like it's what persists when we continue to meditate on a regular basis, right? This concentrated body mind, which is much easier to cultivate when you are in a monastery, because there's less distractions, and that's what the schedule is about. And yet, even in a monastery, you can still escape, through zazen. You can avoid stuff in your life by practicing zazen. Everything can be a crutch. I do feel that that because shikantaza, I do feel that it cannot be so efficacious. Even though I know we're not supposed to have goals, I feel like, and I haven't done practice discussion or dokusan with hundreds of people like Paul and Teah, other teachers, but I do feel that it's not always so easy, really, for a beginner to just sit without having an anchor of meditation. And I feel like if people are not experiencing concentrated body mind, then that can as my teacher would remind me, the enlightenment experiences, they are encouraging on the path, but they're not the goal. And just because there's an enlightenment experience doesn't mean you're enlightened. I mean, we already are enlightened, right? Practice, realization, Buddha nature, right. But people maybe get a taste. Verified. Right. People may get a taste of Kensho and just, that's it. They just think they don't need to go to therapy. They can do whatever they want. And that's not the teaching either. It's, and it's not, it's just, it does nothing to do with you. It's just, it's karma, So if you take ownership of Kensho, if you say, oh yeah, well, you're kind of missing the point. It's not you, ever you. Right. So I feel like there could be a little bit of a middle way, not grasping on and rushing toward Kensho and attaching to it, but also maybe you could walk through the mist for 35 years and there never be Kensho, which is okay as well. So I feel like I understand why some teachers don't stress it, because then people sometimes feel like they're missing something. Oh, well, I haven't had enlightenment experience. I haven't had Kensho. And then can get really deflating for them, And then also, I think that striving obviously can work, can be detrimental. And I think that, that's why it's helpful to work with a teacher, because they can be a guide for you on the path.
Yeah, definitely. So when you were at that practice period, so you first got the inkling to be a priest. Was that hard to make the jump from, was it hard to convince people to let you be a priest, or was it a smooth transition? Like how did you, like, kind of sociologically, what was the process of becoming a priest?
Yeah. So I first asked Teah in the fall of 2008. And I think she kind of ignored me because, I was in the throes of my first practice period, and, it was like the honeymoon of Zen. And then I was like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Do I really want to be a priest? What does that even mean? Because coming from my background, I didn't really have a positive experience of clergy in the Catholic in my Catholic school, although, I didn't really have necessarily a negative one.
Right.
And, I didn't really see myself in that way. And this was, I was my early 40s. And then I just let go of itself, but I ended up staying. My first stint at the monastery was for 1.5 years. And then I went to practice with Pema Chodron at Gampo Abbey, did the Yarne, the Rains retreat there. I'm not sure when I picked it up again, because I left Tassajara for a few years. Then I went back. And I always, of course, kept in touch with my teacher and continued to practice. And then it wasn't until I got back to Tassajara, that would have been in 2000, I don't even remember anymore, 2000. I left in 2000. I think I went back in 2012. And yeah, it felt like it was still there. Like I felt like every time I tried to leave Zen, if you will, like my life just kept going back to Zen. You know,
Right.
it just kept showing up. And
When
then
I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Exactly right. To quote Al Pacino. So yeah, so I think at some point it just seemed like this is my life. And so I asked her first in 2008, and then, you know, she's pretty strict. She hasn't ordained that many people. I mean, she's pretty strict about ordaining people, in that she sees priests as people who are caring for a temple and a sangha. And obviously in the United States, it's a very mixed bag of like you could say I was a monk, but I never took like lifetime celibacy vows. I was celibate when I was there for the most part until I went back again. And then you have people who, you know, are priests who have their shaved heads, but they're out in the world. And I'm living at Zen Center and my head's not shaved. So it's just not so clear cut anymore.
Tons of gray area.
Right? So many gray areas. And so eventually she agreed to ordain me. It took a while. And it was actually 2014 that I was ordained. It's wrong on my bio for whatever reason. I've not gotten around to correct it. But in October 2014, she ordained me in Brooklyn, at the Brooklyn Zen Center. It's a little bit of a mystery. I wouldn't say that being a Zen priest was ever on my bucket list. So I'm not really sure. I just felt like I was like, in a way, just how to be grateful and transmit to people.
How much of it was, I mean, part of being a priest is becoming kind of a service vector, right? You know, you're becoming a conduit between practice and people, right? But there's also just a deeper level of commitment too, personally. Was that was any of it just the commitment part of it? Was kind of your motivation at all?
Well, yeah, I feel like, I wasn't raised in like a civically minded household. So we didn't really do any service projects like maybe other people did. And when I first got to Tassajara, I was really impressed by especially the young people. And in particular, I'm thinking of a few young men in their 20s, and I was already in my 40s. And I was really just impressed by how service oriented they were, how helpful they were. And I think my experience at the monastery really made me value Sangha and that kind of collective, that collective aspiration to live harmoniously, to live to benefit each other. And I agree. I confess that I feel like it also kind of clashed with my kind of rebellious teenager perception of myself, or just that independent streak that I have, or what does it mean to be clergy? So I was like, oh, that just seems weird to me. But it's eventually it's what happened, and I just kept looking at what was happening in my life, right? What is already happening in my life? And even though I had ideas like work in documentary film, I used to work for the Austin Film Festival writing grants, and I've written grants for documentary filmmakers, and I love documentary film. And it just kept, there was Zen, and that's what, like, if you will, the path of least resistance in some ways. I was just over and over again being supported to practice Zen, So I don't know if service was really the ultimate thing for me. The alleviation of all these kleshas was what I wanted to offer to people.
Cool. So did you get ordained in California or Brooklyn?
I got ordained at the Brooklyn Zen Center. in October 2014.
So you did all your sewing out there and everything. So you probably moved there as part of this project, because I know you wound up in Brooklyn Zen Center and were working there. Was moving there just part of the process of getting ordained? Is that why you were there?
Yeah, I was there because a few reasons. One was my good friends, Greg Snyder and Laura O'Loughlin, who were the co-founders, along with Ian Case. I knew Greg and Laura from Austin Zen Center. Mm-hmm. We met like in 2002 or 3. And they moved from Austin to New York, which is where Laura is originally from. And anyway, I hadn't really seen them very much. And then then Greg came to Tassajara for like 30 days when I was there. And we started chatting, and he asked me if I would come and help out, with the Zen Center, and Teah asked me as well. So I thought, well, I've always wanted to live in New York proper. So I moved out there in May or so of 2013, got a full-time job, which is kind of a crazy thing, going from a monastery to Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And then after working for a year at a nonprofit in Manhattan, I started working for them full-time, Brooklyn Zen Center. Mm-hmm. And I did sew. Yeah, that's where I was sewing. I sewed there. And since I was there, I ordained there with the Sangha. And then about a year later, I moved back to Tassajara and became the Ino, or the supervisor of the meditation hall there. So
what motivated the move back to Tassajara?
Yeah, I just felt, partly like the funding for my role was sort of running out. One, mm-hmm. There were some changes at Tassajara where a number of more senior practitioners were leaving, and there was an opportunity for me to be the Ino. Mm-hmm. And I really just kind of missed being at the monastery. I missed my friends there. It was a little hard to be at full-time working for Brooklyn Zen Center when it wasn't a residential community, mm-hmm. and everybody else was working or had a family, and they were just there a few times a week. And so I like being around people and collaborating. And even though I loved working with Greg and Laura and other people there, if I had been residential, maybe I would have stayed a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. But I just felt the call of the mountains and the rivers and the quiet of the monastery.
How was the ordination process for you? Was that emotionally moving? Was it no big deal for you? What? It seems people are all over the map. Some people are like, oh, it didn't really change anything, and other people are like, it was amazing. I'm curious where you fall on that spectrum.
It depends on the moment. I felt like a lot of elation leading up to it, and I also felt. Well, obviously I felt unprepared and felt I think the main thing is sort of how I feel after Dharma transmission. I just feel more responsible, mm-hmm. and more responsible to say, I don't know what I don't know. If you ask me a question, mm-hmm. If I give a Dharma talk and someone says, well, what are the antidotes to the 5 hindrances? And I'm like, oh, I don't have them all memorized. Like, just sit. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, just sit. Right. So I think I feel more responsible to live up to the Bodhisattva vow, even if I'm, constantly bumping up against my karma, and also feel, the responsibility of transmitting the lineage of Suzuki Roshi. Mm-hmm. And more responsible to be as accurate as possible with the knowledge that I'm conveying, and more responsible for any unskillful words or actions that I might perpetrate on others.
Mm-hmm. Were you in Tassajara during any of the fires?
I was there, I think, for almost all of them.
Did you
got a lot of experience being evacuated from Tassajara. I arrived in June 2008, 3 weeks before the Basin Complex fire.
That was the big one, right? That was the big one. That's the one the Fire Monks book is based on, is that right?
Right. So the other big one was the Marble Cone Fire in the 70s.
Yeah, I didn't know about that one.
Yeah. So I was there for the Basin Complex fire. I just, quit my job, drove across the country. And then 3 weeks later, we're all evacuated. I came to City Center and stayed here for about 3.5 weeks. Then we all went back in August, cleaned the monastery, including the pool, which was kind of a mess because all this dirt and rocks and debris fell into it. And then we had like another, I would say 6 weeks of the guest season before the practice period started. So that was my introduction, but it was kind of cool because Teah was here at City Center. So I got to spend more time with her. And then and then I was there I don't know if there was a fire 2012 I left, but then there was another fire like in 2016 where the guest season was closed. We had to evacuate all the guests. I'm pretty sure it was 2016. When I was the Eno, there was a big fire that we closed the monastery for. And then there was another one just in 2020, in August 2020, the first COVID summer. I was there with my spouse and for the whole summer. And then we were evacuated in August 2020. And I think there was another one in 2018. I usually go by what role I was in. I thought there was, when I was becoming the Tenzo, now that was 20. Anyway, yeah. So like 3 or 4, I think 3 or 4 fires I've been evacuated from.
So you mentioned spouse. Are you married to someone in San Francisco Zen Center ecosystem?
Yeah. So my spouse, I met my spouse, Tanya, at Tassajara in September 2015. She had been there already for, I want to say, 1.5 years or so. And then, we were married in January 5th, I think, 2017. And yeah, so she lived there altogether for 7 years, just like I did. But she was there almost the whole time for 7 years. I did 1.5 years and then I left. And then I came back for like another year and then I left. Then I came back again. So
do you both live at City Center now?
Yeah, we live in an apartment building that Zen Center owns. She is a Rolfer, structural integrationist. So she doesn't work for Zen Center anymore. So
yeah. Cool. And who married you? Was it Teah?
No, we got married at City Hall here at San Francisco.
Oh, interesting.
By a former police officer, who is now the Justice of the Peace there. So I think I'm pretty sure he was gay. So he was like a gay former police officer, which seems so perfect for San Francisco, who's now a Justice of the Peace or a chaplain at the City Hall, ordaining, performing the ceremony in this it's a beautiful building. If you've never been to the City Center, to this City Hall, San Francisco is absolutely beautiful. So,
yeah, I was the best man at my friend getting married there once.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous. So we just we didn't really have much time, and when you're older, it maybe doesn't have as many bells and whistles attached to it.
Right. So you're a few more things I want to hit on before we go. So when you were Shuso, who were you Shuso under?
Yeah, Paul Haller.
Yeah.
I had the honor of Paul being the teacher at Tassajara for some of my milestone practice periods. So my first practice period, then my third one, I was his anja, so his attendant during the practice period. Then I was on the Doan Rio when he was there as the teacher. And then I was the Eno, my first practice period as the Eno, he was the teacher. And then I was Shuso. So it was a lot of key practice periods with Paul.
And how is it? Is it kind of like, you're up for being Shusho and it's just whoever the abbot's going to be, or do they pick their Shusho? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think they have like a list of people they feel are ready or on their way to being ready, depending on many causes and conditions, like how many practice periods have you done, at which Zen centers, how long have you been in residence, what's your understanding of the dharma, what roles have you held, what's your psycho-emotional maturity. I would raise that fairly high on the list. And then Paul's not, I mean, he's my teacher, but he's not my root teacher. And at Zen Center, only current abbots and former abbots can actually lead practice periods at Tassajara. So Teah would have never been asked to lead a practice period because she's never been the abbot. So that means you're Shuso with teachers who are not your root teacher. But I had done so many practice periods with Paul, and we have a very good relationship. So he asked me, and so I did that. I was his Shuso in January 2018, and my spouse Tanya, who met Paul years and years ago in Belfast, she was his Jisha, his ceremonial attendant, that practice period that I was the head monk with him. So.
Interesting. Was there anything surprising about the Shuso practice period you weren't expecting?
Well, it was, as many people who are Shuso at Tassajara would say, it was like the best job, the best role, because you're just there supporting people. You're not the Ino, you're not the Tonto, so you're not enforcing, if you will. You're not the cop. You're not saying, why aren't you in the Zendo? How can I help you get to the Zendo? Remember the Zendo. You're not the Tenzo, frantically trying to make meals and waking up at all hours in a panic attack because you don't remember what the menu is or whatever it is. And so you just get to care for people's practice. And in that way, it's like this not self characteristic, right? Just pervading you because you're there to support everybody in the monastery rather than having to, so that's your role, is to support everybody and encourage everybody. So that's why it's the most favorite role. There is that wake up bell though, the head monk at Tassajara at City Center in Green Gulch. At Tassajara, the head monk runs the wake up bell every morning at 3:50. So it's early. Right. And that bell is heavy and loud. I used to wear earplugs and noise cancellation things from like the shop when I ran with it. So
I that first session I sat at City Center, everything was so new to me that the sound of the bell just really stuck with me, because I didn't want to get up. And to this day, if I hear a bell that sounds like that, it's like, I'm like, gotta get up, it gives me a huge, emotional jolt,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, exactly. Any bell sound, you're like, what, am I late? Where am I supposed to be?
So the Dharma transmission process, is there anything that was surprising about that to you, or anything interesting that you would want to say about that process?
Well, what comes up is, the M word, just the mystery of life, all the causes and conditions from this lifetime and any past lifetimes. Whether I believe in that or not, I'm not so sure. But just how is it that this is what's arisen, and just the sacredness of rituals, which we really probably have lost we don't really do rituals in the United States, right? And of course, it's a large,
just baseball, pretty much.
Exactly, right? So it's a large country with many cultures, which makes it beautiful and amazing, and also it makes it. I think the dilution, if you will, of ritual. Because I think has been a negative in our society, because we have rites of passage. You get really drunk in college and stuff. I mean, there's no rites of passage that are healthy and inspiring and wholesome for teenagers or anything. We have like weddings and stuff. I guess that's obviously a ceremony, a ritual, but I feel like that sacredness is lost in that way. And have you read Zenju manuals? The
shamanistic.
The shamanic.
I need to, and I haven't, but I own it. I just need to own it. I just need to read it. Yeah.
She does such a beautiful job of conveying what it is the mystery of rituals and how they help us embody Buddha nature, embody the mystery that runs through all of us. And how that, like how Zazen, like Dan Layton says in his book, in his essay, Zazen as enactment ritual, just sitting Zazen, sitting meditation is a ritual in and of itself. So these rituals, especially like if you're at the monastery and you're in these rituals spaces all the time, service every morning, every midday, every evening, it just permeates your body, mind, and helps you continue to wake up. And I think wake up in the sense of I'm waking up with the ritual of the bell, but I'm also waking up to reality each moment. And also for me, the sense of wonder, which I feel like is what Zen has done for me, alleviated a lot of these heavy emotions, and also restored the sense of wonder. Not all the time, of course, but just like walking down the street and then stopping and watching a leaf fall to the ground, like just feeling that leaf, the wind, and being with that as it's happening. So that wonder is really a word for me that came up a lot at Tassajara, was wonder. So.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's funny. I was talking earlier about kind of the self part of the network in the brain. They've actually done some studies to figure out what is the neurobiology of awe. And it turns out the more that the self network in the brain, the fault mode network is cranking along, the less awe someone feels. And the more it's kind of quieted, the more awe someone feels. The awe and self-referential cognition are anti-correlated. And I found that really interesting when I came across those studies.
Yeah,
sort of matches my experience.
Yeah, I would love to, on my list of people to interview for my podcast. I don't know how to get a hold of him. Maybe you do. James Austin, who wrote.
Yeah.
Your brain, the brain and Zen in the brain.
Yeah.
But he's really old now though. So I don't.
Yeah. I was thinking. Yeah.
Anyway, I remember reading excerpts from his book while I was in the library at Tassajara. And I also have this book here, which I have yet to read, Richard Shankman's book, The Experience of Samadhi. And so, yeah, I think that wonder and amazement, the word awe, which of course is overused with awesome, but yes, being filled with awe. And there's something, I would say if anybody listening, going to a monastery is just a beautiful privilege. And really, as I chatted with Norman Fisher about in one of my first podcasts, we both just get goosebumps remembering about being at the monastery. It's such a beautiful experience to.
Yeah. Whenever a young person gets into Zen and I'm talking to them, I'm always like, go do residential practice. This is the chance in your life where you're most likely to be able to do it. You should definitely go. I always try to encourage people to do it. I mean, it's just a different, I firmly believe a 100% lay practice is a valid path to awakening. I'm not saying otherwise, but it is very helpful to do a period of residential practice, I think.
I agree. It was for me. I didn't expect to stay that long. So watch out, everybody.
So one last thing I wanted to hit, and I appreciate you sticking around so long. I appreciate your generosity of your time here. But one more thing I wanted to hit you on. So you'd mentioned earlier you kind of started dabbling in traditional kind of Harada Yasutani Koan practice. I'd be curious to hear a little bit what that experience has been like to you and what you feel you've gotten from it and so forth.
Moo! So I've been doing koan introspection with Dosho Port Roshi, which I'm very appreciative of his willingness to work with me in that way. I've never met him in person, just online. And I feel.
So I'm going to interrupt. Sorry, real quick. Yeah, I will say we were talking about sometimes it's hard to feel somebody's embodied presence. So he's somebody's embodied presence you can still feel over the internet, definitely.
Yeah, I find him to be very I find him to be very funny, which I love humor. I love laughing with people, and direct and warm, and also firm.
Yeah, but he refuses to speak his mind, which is kind of frustrating.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I really apologize for interrupting, but what you were saying.
Well, in my doing my own podcast and interviewing dosho about Zen and what I called one track Zen, where, there is no, I mean, the bifurcation of Renzai and Soto, my understanding, which of course is very limited since I'm not a scholar, my reading is that it's maybe was more pronounced in the West than maybe it should have been. And that, it shouldn't, I don't think it should be either you're doing koan introspection or you're doing Shikin Taza. I feel like those are, twins that were separated. And I feel like they are wonderful complementary practices. So for me, my experience with dosho, with working with Mu, yeah, it's at times it's fun and friendly, and other times it's kind of frustrating. How to express that which cannot be expressed. I mean, and doing it through this virtual way where I'm not in his presence, he's not in my presence, and there's only so much gesticulation you can do when you're doing this through Zoom.
Right.
So obviously it's different. It's different from how it was done in the past. And, but I've been appreciating I sometimes say like accessing I say brain grid, but there's a way in which the koan introspection, I feel like, is enlivening my Shikin Taza, and giving me, like informing my Shikin Taza as I practice with Mu, as I'm sitting, and then also, practicing off the cushion as well. And I have this little sticky note here that I vow to embody Mu tirelessly. But, Dosho told me it's really timelessly, but I wrote it down incorrectly. But I like tirelessly. So anyway, just remembering Mu as I go along in my day, about my day. And I think it's anything that can, break up the routine mind, like going somewhere where you don't speak the language. Right. Whatever can shake up our sense of self. And I feel like koan introspection, right, it confounds the logical mind, and it helps to break up the sense of the solid Heather as an actor or somebody who has agency in the way that most people understand. It's like how to keep that sense of not self as I go about my day. So
yeah, I'm a little similar to you, where I was kind of a lifelong Shikin Taza practitioner. And even to this day, I can't not do Shikin Taza, even if I tried. It's just too much of a muscle memory. I can't hold a koan while sitting, like some people can. Yeah, I just revert to Shikin Taza, whether I like to or not. But one thing I will say, and I just picked up koans just out of curiosity. I didn't go into it with this like great need for me to fix me or anything. I just thought, I'm curious about koans, but so I was able to head into it kind of really lightheartedly without putting a lot of drama into it, and it didn't have much expectations at all. But I would say one thing I really liked about them is I didn't realize how much I was objectifying ultimate reality. I was making it a thing. And I'm not sure. Had it not been for koans, I don't think I ever would have seen that error in perception. That's one thing I really like about it.
How do you feel like the koan introspection has helped you not reify?
It was kind of the Mu process, because the Mu process is about identity in a lot of ways. And then just I can't really answer your question without giving away some answers. So, but like it was that process made me realize like, I have turned ultimate reality into an object, and this is weird. This is not cool.
Here comes my Jushi sword.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I'm super grateful for it. And it was like an affliction I didn't know I had, and I'm not sure I would have, even though in retrospect, I think I've had a lot of teachers who tried pointing it out, but it wasn't sinking in for whatever reason.
Right. Yeah. Understood. Well, I'm glad that you're practicing in that way. I think whatever it takes to break up the sense of solidity. As Dogen says, one of my favorite quotes of his is, reality is an icicle forming in fire.
Cool. So as we're wrapping up here, I'm curious, do you have any dharma plans in the future? Are you going to stick with this role for a while? What do you see coming ahead for you, just like kind of practically as far as life situation goes and practice activities?
Well, yeah, I don't really, the habit at the monastery was basically like living my life in 3-month increments. Like, oh, I'll stay for another 3-month practice period. I'll stay for another 3-month practice period. So I feel like right now, just my dharma plans, if you will, are just to continue to deepen my understanding of the dharma through the koan introspection, through, partly why I started the Spark Zen newsletter and podcast was just to create a container for myself to study. Like, oh, I need to read this. I can talk with Stephen Hine about Dogen, right? So I think that was me just trying to give myself a container for study and to challenge myself in that way. So I just feel like continuing to do my best to be a helpful member of Zen Center and to continue to learn as much as I can, both intellectually as well, although I don't remember things very well these days, details, but and then also to just deepen my on the Christian practice. So I don't really have any, I think the monastery kind of attenuated my egoic ambition in many ways.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to work on being grateful for all that's arising in life right now. So
great. Yeah. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you for online practice discussion, or if they wanted to be more involved with the online Zendo at San Francisco Zen Center, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can email me at heather.iaru, S as in Sam, S as in Sam O, Heather Iarusso at sfcc.org.
Okay. And is that information through the website too, or?
Yeah, they can look for my name on the website, on the Zen Center website, or on my Spark Zen, which I have a different email address for Spark Zen, but it's there as well. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what happens after Spark Zen. It's a great podcast. I listen to it every week.
Well, thanks so much.
Every week that you put it out, sometimes it's just written. Yeah.
Well, thank you also for doing your modern day transmission of the light through Simplicity Zen. So I'm glad that we're collaborating competitors.
All right.
I hope to see you again. Take good care. Okay. Bye-bye.